For Father's Day, my daughter and her husband gave his father a $13,000 cruise. They gave me a $2 lottery ticket and a condescending smile. They joked I was a low-risk, zero-potential investment. Little did they know that $2 ticket would hit the $150 million jackpot, and I would use it to show them the real meaning of a high-potential investment they would never forget. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up for your own worth. The brunch was held at the Sterling's lakeside mansion, a place so large and sterile it felt more like a modern art museum than a home. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the cold marble floors and glinting on the surface of the infinity pool that seemed to merge with the lake beyond. I sat on a white leather couch that probably cost more than my first car, feeling like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a sterile laboratory. I was wearing my best khakis and a crisp polo shirt, but in this ocean of designer labels and quiet luxury, I might as well have been wearing my old postal service uniform. The air was thick with conversations I couldn't connect with. They talked about diversifying portfolios, capital gains tax, and the best marinas to dock a yacht. My son-in-law Alex held court, his voice loud and confident, while his father Harrison nodded along with the quiet authority of a king surveying his domain. My daughter Emily flitted around nervously. She kept coming over to me not to talk, but to adjust things. She'd straighten my collar brush, a non-existent piece of lint from my shoulder, or refill my glass of iced tea when it was already full. Each gesture was a small, frantic signal of her anxiety, a desperate attempt to make me fit into a world where I clearly didn't belong. I wanted to tell her to relax, to tell her I was fine, but I knew the truth. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about what they thought of me, and by extension, what they thought of her for being connected to me. After an hour of this polite purgatory, Harrison Sterling clapped his hands together, signaling it was time for the main event. The gift exchange. Alex and Emily stood together, beaming, as Alex produced a sleek silver box. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," Alex said, his voice booming with performative generosity. "Emily and I wanted to get you something you'd truly enjoy." Harrison opened the box to reveal a beautifully printed itinerary and a set of gleaming travel documents. "A $13,000 two-week luxury cruise down the Danube," Emily announced, her voice a little too loud. Harrison inspected the documents with a look of smug satisfaction. "Excellent choice," he declared, as if he were approving a business transaction rather than receiving a gift from his children. "A man of my standing deserves to see the world properly." The small gathering of their friends applauded politely. Then the spotlight swiveled, and every eye in the room landed on me. The atmosphere instantly changed. The confident energy evaporated, replaced by a thick, awkward silence. Emily approached me, her smile tight and unnatural. She was holding a simple store-bought Father's Day card. "This is for you, Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She couldn't meet my eyes. "We thought it would be fun. A little excitement." My hands felt strangely heavy as I took the card from her. I opened it. Inside, below the generic printed message of "Happy Father's Day to a great dad," was a single thin piece of paper, a $2 Mega Millions ticket. The numbers were already pre-selected. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The sheer brutal contrast of the two gifts hung in the air, thick and suffocating. A $13,000 experience for him, a $2 slip of paper for me. It wasn't the monetary value that struck me like a physical blow. It was the story it told. Their gift to Harrison was an investment in their status, a tribute to the power and wealth they worshipped. Their gift to me was an afterthought, a joke. It was a message that my entire life's work, my 40 years of service, my sacrifices to give her the best life I could, were worth exactly $2 of fun. I looked up from the ticket and into my daughter's eyes. I saw it all there. I saw the deep, gnawing shame she felt, but underneath it, I saw something harder, something colder. It was defiance. It was the silent, painful confirmation that she had chosen her new family, her new life, and her new set of values. In her world, I was no longer an asset. I was a liability to be managed with cheap gestures and condescending smiles. The pain was sharp and visceral, a quiet severing of a bond I thought was unbreakable. Alex, ever the showman, decided to break the tension with what he probably thought was a clever joke. He wrapped his arm around Emily's shoulders, pulling her close. "See, Dad," he said, projecting his voice so everyone could hear a sly wink aimed at Harrison. "We're teaching Emily about smart investments. Low risk, high potential." He smirked, and Harrison let out a short, appreciative chuckle. The insult was perfectly crafted, delivered with the casual cruelty of the truly arrogant. Low risk, zero potential. That was me. I was the joke's punchline. I didn't say a word. I didn't protest. I didn't show the rage and hurt that were churning inside my chest. I simply folded the card, neatly took the lottery ticket, and slid it carefully into my wallet, right next to the worn-out picture of my late wife, Diane. A cold calm settled over me. The hurt didn't vanish, but it transformed. It hardened from a raw, aching wound into a solid core of ice in my gut. I looked at my daughter, at her husband, at his father. They were smiling, relieved that the awkward moment had passed, already moving on to talk of their next acquisition. They had no idea what they had just done. They thought they had just given me a worthless piece of paper. But what they had really given me was a purpose. The drive home was a silent 20-mile funeral for the daughter I thought I knew. I sat behind the wheel of my 10-year-old Buick, a car I'd kept in pristine condition, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The windows were up, trapping a heavy silence that was louder than any of the shouting I had wanted to do back at that cold, white mansion. My mind kept replaying the scene, not the grand insult from Alex, but the small, quiet betrayal from Emily. Her averted eyes, the brittle smile, the way she handed me that envelope as if it were contaminated. Every mile that passed, the image of my late wife Diane grew stronger in my mind. I could almost feel her sitting in the passenger seat beside me, her hand on my arm, her presence a warm, protective shield. Diane would never have stood for it. She would have fixed Emily with that look of hers, the one that could stop a charging bull in its tracks, and she would have spoken the truth right there in that marble-floored showroom they called a living room. She would have reminded our daughter about the vacations we never took, the second jobs I worked during the holidays, the worn-out couch we kept for 15 years. All for her. All for the college fund. We started with a glass jar on the kitchen counter, a jar we filled with crumpled dollar bills and loose change for 18 years. We believed we were investing in her future, but more than that, we believed we were investing in her character. We taught her that the value of a thing wasn't in its price tag, but in the work and love that went into it. That was the core of my life's work. 40 years with the United States Postal Service. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it had a nobility that these people would never understand. It was built on a promise. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night. I had lived by that creed. I had walked miles in blistering summer heat and trudged through knee-deep snowdrifts in the dead of winter, all to make sure a letter, a package, a promise reached its destination. It was about reliability. It was about seeing a commitment through to the end. I had delivered for this country for 4 decades, and more importantly, I had delivered for my family every single day. I thought I had taught Emily that. I thought she understood that the foundation of her comfortable life, now her marketing job, her wealthy husband, was built on a mountain of small, consistent sacrifices made by 2 people who loved her more than life itself. But seeing her today, I realized she hadn't just forgotten. She had actively discarded it. She had traded it all in for a seat at their table, and the price of admission was her father's dignity. The pain wasn't in the $2 piece of paper now tucked in my wallet. It was in the realization that she looked at my life, at her mother's memory, and valued it all at less than a cheap gimmick. She had participated in the mockery. She saw my life of service not as a source of pride, but as a source of her own embarrassment. And that was a wound far deeper than any public insult. The car ate up the miles, carrying me back to the small, quiet house filled with ghosts and memories. A house that now felt like the only real thing in the world. The anger hadn't fully formed yet, still buried under a thick blanket of grief. But as I pulled into my driveway and turned off the engine, the silence that followed was different. It wasn't just empty anymore. It was waiting. A few days passed in a quiet gray haze. I went through the motions of my retired life, watering the plants Diane had loved, reading the morning paper, walking the same familiar blocks around my neighborhood. But everything felt different. A shadow had fallen over it, all the shadow of my daughter's choice. On Wednesday afternoon, I decided to tackle a task I'd been putting off for months, cleaning out my old leather wallet. It was worn and soft from decades of use, the edges frayed, the inside holding old receipts and expired insurance cards. As I emptied its contents onto the kitchen table, I found it tucked behind the plastic sleeve that still held a faded picture of Diane, the $2 Mega Millions ticket. My first instinct was a flash of anger. I crumpled it in my fist, the sharp corners digging into my palm. It was a symbol of my humiliation, a cheap piece of paper that represented my new place in my daughter's world. I was about to toss it into the trash can to be rid of the memory forever, but something stopped me. It wasn't hope. It was something closer to a need for finality. I wanted to see the losing numbers with my own eyes, to confirm its worthlessness, and then throw it away, closing the chapter for good. I walked over to the old desktop computer in the corner of the living room, its fan humming softly. I pulled up the state lottery website, the bright flashy colors of the page a stark contrast to the gloom I felt. The winning numbers from Saturday night were displayed in large, bold font. I smoothed the crumpled ticket out on the desk beside the keyboard and looked at the first number. 17. I glanced at the screen. The first number was 17, a meaningless coincidence. My eyes moved to the next number on the ticket, 24. On the screen, the second ball was also 24. My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs. I told myself to stop. It was just a silly game. The third number on my ticket was 31. I slowly raised my eyes to the monitor. 31. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer, my nose almost touching the screen, as if the pixels might change if I stared hard enough. My hand began to tremble slightly as I looked at the fourth number. 46. The fourth winning number was 46. The quiet hum of the computer fan suddenly seemed deafening. The world had narrowed to just me, the desk, and these impossible numbers. I looked at the fifth and final white ball on my ticket. 53. On the screen, the fifth ball was 53, a perfect match. For a moment, my mind went completely blank. It was a statistical impossibility, a dream. I thought I was hallucinating, that the grief and anger of the past few days had finally made something in my brain snap. Then I saw the last number, the gold mega ball. On my ticket, the number was a simple, solid 9. On the screen, the winning mega ball was 9. Time stopped. I pushed my chair back from the desk so abruptly that one of its legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I couldn't breathe. I was gasping, pulling in air that didn't seem to have any oxygen in it. I refreshed the web page. The numbers remained unchanged. Then I saw the headline below them, single winning ticket for $150 million jackpot sold at a convenience store in Northwood. My town. My store. I sank into the chair, my body trembling, my head spinning. $150 million. The number was abstract, meaningless. The initial shock was a tidal wave that washed away everything else. But as the minutes ticked by and my heartbeat began to slow, the shock receded and something else took its place. I looked at the crumpled ticket still lying on the desk. The flimsy piece of paper no longer looked like an insult. It looked like a weapon. The memory of Alex's smug face, of Emily's averted eyes, of Harrison's dismissive nod, all came rushing back. But this time they were different. They were no longer sources of pain. They were targets. A single clear and razor-sharp thought cut through the chaos in my mind. This wasn't luck. This was leverage. For an hour I just sat there at the kitchen table, the winning ticket lying in front of me like a sacred text. The world outside continued as normal. I could hear Mrs. Henderson's dog barking next door and the distant rumble of the afternoon train. But inside my small house, the laws of physics had changed. The tectonic plates of my life had shifted, and a new continent of possibilities had risen from the sea. My mind, which had been foggy with grief, was now operating with a chilling clarity. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a dead calm, the kind you see at the eye of a hurricane. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The sums were too vast, the stakes too high. The first person I thought of wasn't a fancy lawyer from a downtown firm. It was George Finch. George had been my friend for over 40 years. We'd started our careers around the same time, me at the post office, him as a certified public accountant. He was the most meticulous, straight-arrow man I had ever known, a man who believed in the simple, unwavering truth of numbers. He was retired now, but I knew his mind was as sharp as it had ever been. Most importantly, I trusted him. I trusted him with my life, and now I had to trust him with this. So I picked up the old landline phone from its cradle on the wall, its familiar weight a comfort in my hand. I didn't need to look up his number. I had known it by heart for decades. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up, his voice the same as ever, a little gravelly, endlessly patient. "Finch here," he said. "George," I said, and my own voice surprised me. It was level. It was calm. It was the voice of a man who was completely in control. "It's Bob Vance." There was a moment of warmth as we exchanged pleasantries, asking about his grandkids, talking about the weather. But I cut it short. "George, listen." I said, my tone shifting just enough to let him know this wasn't a social call. "Something has happened. Something significant." I could almost hear him straighten up in his chair on the other end of the line. George knew me. He knew I wasn't a man for drama or exaggeration. He waited. "I need your help." I continued, speaking slowly and deliberately. "And more than your help, I need your absolute discretion. I need you to promise me that whatever I am about to tell you stays between us and these 4 walls. No one can know, not yet." There was a pause, and I knew he was processing the gravity of my words. Then his voice came back firm and clear, without a trace of hesitation. "You have my word, Bob," he said. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "It's a long story, George," I replied. "But let's just say my daughter gave me a lottery ticket for Father's Day. The silent war had just begun, and I had just enlisted my first soldier. The day I met the lawyer, it felt like I was stepping into a different reality. George picked me up in his meticulously maintained Lincoln, and we drove downtown to a tall glass tower that scraped the sky. The law firm of Reed, Covington & Dunn occupied the top 3 floors. We rode the silent high-speed elevator up to the penthouse level, and the doors opened onto a lobby of polished marble, dark wood, and quiet, immense wealth. This was the world the Sterlings inhabited, a world where power was a silent language spoken in the quality of the leather on the chairs and the thickness of the carpet under your feet. George had prepared me, but it was still a shock to the system. Mr. Alistair Reed was exactly the man you would want in a crisis. He was in his late 60s with a mane of silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He didn't waste time with small talk. He shook my hand, offered us coffee, and then sat behind his enormous mahogany desk, folding his hands. "George tells me you have a matter of some significance and delicacy, Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Please tell me everything." For the next hour, I told him. I told him about my 40 years at the post office, about my wife Diane, about our daughter Emily. And I told him about the Father's Day brunch, the $13,000 cruise, and the $2 lottery ticket. I laid the ticket itself on his desk, a small crumpled piece of paper that looked absurdly out of place on the gleaming polished wood. Reed listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. He was a stone wall, absorbing every detail without judgment. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up the ticket, examining it as if it were a rare artifact. $150 million, he said, not with excitement, but as a statement of fact, a problem to be solved. Your instincts are correct, Mr. Vance. The first step is not to celebrate. The first step is to build a fortress. For the next 2 hours, he and George educated me in the art of financial warfare. I learned a new vocabulary that day. Words like fiduciary duty, tax liability, and anonymity provisions. Reed explained that in our state we had the legal right to claim the prize without our name being released to the public, but it had to be done correctly through a legal entity. He recommended we establish something called a blind trust. He described it as a legal vault, a structure that would own the assets managed by a trustee, him with the beneficiary, me, shielded from public view. The trust will be the winner of the lottery, he explained. You will simply be the beneficiary of the trust. To the world, Bob Vance, retired postal supervisor, remains Bob Vance, but in the rooms where it matters, the trust will have a voice. Then came the most important part. The trust needs a name, Reed said, looking at me. I didn't have to think for a second. The DV Legacy Trust, I said, my voice thick with emotion. George put a comforting hand on my shoulder. For Diane Vance, I clarified, though both men already understood. It felt like the first true act of defiance. Emily and her husband had devalued the life Diane and I had built. Now Diane's name would be attached to a force so powerful they couldn't possibly comprehend it. Her legacy of love and sacrifice was about to be weaponized. The process was methodical, precise, and empowering. We signed documents, notarized papers, and laid out a clear step-by-step plan. Mr. Reed would act as the public face of the trust, handling all media and legal inquiries. The money would be claimed, transferred into the trust's accounts, and a diversified investment portfolio would be established. For the first time since that horrible Sunday, I felt a sense of control. The grief and humiliation were still there, but now they were fuel. I was no longer a victim of their condescension. I was becoming a strategist. I was learning to speak their language, the language of money and power, but I would use it to say things they would never expect. As we left the office that afternoon and stepped back out into the bright sunlight, I felt like a different man. The fortress had been built. The walls were secure, and from behind them I could finally begin to plan my first move. The call came on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the Father's Day brunch. I was in my workshop in the garage, sanding down a small wooden bookshelf I was restoring. The smell of sawdust and old wood filled the air, a scent of honest work and patience. The phone rang, and I saw Emily's name on the screen. A part of me, a foolish fatherly part, hoped it was a call to apologize. I was wrong. Her voice, when I answered, was a high-pitched, syrupy sweet sound I hadn't heard since she was a teenager trying to convince me to let her borrow the car. "Hi, Daddy," she cooed. "How are you?" Before I could answer, another voice cut in, impatient and sharp. It was Alex. "Bob, we don't have time for small talk," he said, his voice tight with a panic he was failing to conceal. "We're in a bit of a situation here, and we need your help." I leaned against my workbench, the familiar grit of sawdust under my fingers, and listened. For the next 10 minutes, Alex painted a picture of a business deal on the verge of spectacular failure. He used a lot of impressive-sounding words like leveraged assets, short-term liquidity crisis, and unforeseen market fluctuations. But I had spent a lifetime reading between the lines on official forms and deciphering bureaucratic jargon. I knew what he was really saying. He and Emily had gambled. They had taken a huge financial risk on a commercial real estate deal, probably using his father's name as collateral, and they had been arrogant and foolish. Now the bill was due. They needed $200,000, he said, and they needed it in a week. If they didn't get it, the deal would collapse. They would lose their entire investment, and worse, they would be humiliated in front of Harrison Sterling. He would never let us hear the end of it. Emily chimed in, her voice trembling. You have to help us, Dad. You just have to. I remained silent, letting their frantic words fill the space. I could hear their desperation, but underneath it, I could hear something else: entitlement. They weren't asking for a favor. They were stating a fact. They had a problem, and I, their father, was the solution. What do you want me to do? I asked, my voice calm and even. Alex cleared his throat, shifting into his slick salesman persona. It's actually a brilliant solution, Bob. Perfect for someone in your position. He began, his tone dripping with condescension, as if he were explaining a simple concept to a child. We've already spoken to a broker. All you need to do is take out a reverse mortgage on your house. The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. A reverse mortgage. I looked around my workshop at the tools hanging neatly on the pegboard, at the faded photograph of Diane tacked to the wall, her smile beaming. This house wasn't just an asset. It was a life. It was the place I had brought my wife home to as a bride. It was the wood floors where Emily took her first steps. It was the walls that had absorbed 40 years of laughter and tears. Diane and I had worked our entire lives to pay it off, to own it free and clear, to have one thing in the world that was truly, completely ours. And now they wanted me to sign it away to cover their reckless bet. You see, Alex continued, oblivious to the sacrilege of his words, you get a huge chunk of cash tax-free. And the best part is, you don't have to pay it back. The bank just takes the house after, you know. He left the end of the sentence hanging, but I heard it loud and clear. After you're gone. Emily must have sensed my silence because she jumped in, her voice pleading. Daddy, please. It's just a house. It's too big for you anyway. What does it matter what happens to it after? This is about our future. About my future. Don't you want me to be happy and successful? That was the moment everything became crystal clear. It's just a house. To her, that's all it was. 4 walls and a roof, an untapped resource. The memories meant nothing. The sacrifices meant nothing. The oak tree we planted in the front yard the day she was born, the pencil marks on the doorframe marking her height each year, the garden in the back where her mother spent countless happy hours. It was all just collateral. Why isn't Harrison helping you? I asked, my voice still quiet. A flash of anger in Alex's reply. He wants to teach us a lesson. He said we need to learn to solve our own problems. I see, I said. So his lesson for you is that you should make me sacrifice my home, the only thing I have left of your mother. The line went quiet for a moment. They had no answer for that because it was the truth. They weren't solving their own problem. They were just transferring the consequences to me. They saw my security, my peace of mind, and the physical embodiment of my life with my wife as nothing more than a convenient ATM. They didn't see a father or a home. They saw a resource to be exploited. I had heard enough. I need to think about this, I said finally. Think about it, Alex almost shouted. There's nothing to think about. We need an answer by tomorrow. I took a deep breath. I'll call you when I've made my decision, I said. And before he could argue further, I hung up the phone. I stood there in the silent workshop, the scent of sawdust in the air. The trap had been set. They thought they had cornered me. They had no idea that all they had done was show me exactly where to strike. I let them wait a full day. I knew they would be stewing, their panic mounting with every passing hour. It wasn't a game. It was a test. I needed to see how they would react under pressure without my immediate compliance. The call came as I knew it would the next afternoon. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in my hand, looking out at the oak tree in the front yard. I answered on the third ring. Alex didn't even bother with a greeting. "Well," he barked into the phone. "We're waiting, Bob. Have you called the bank?" I took a slow sip of my coffee before I answered, my voice deliberately calm and measured. "I've thought about your request," I said, "and my answer is no." For a moment, there was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I think they were so certain of their ability to pressure me that the possibility of refusal hadn't even entered their minds. Alex was the first to recover, his voice exploding with rage. "No. What do you mean, no? This isn't a negotiation. This is your family. This is your daughter's future we're talking about." I could hear Emily in the background, her voice a frantic whisper. "What's he saying? The house is not for sale, Alex," I stated, my voice unwavering. "And it is not collateral. That house is everything your mother and I built together. It's where Emily grew up. It is all I have left of Diane. I will not sign it away to pay for your mistake." The mention of Diane seemed to enrage him further. "Mistake, this was an opportunity, something you would never understand sitting in your little house counting your pension checks. It's a pile of bricks and wood, you selfish old man. Are you really going to let our future crumble because of your sentimentality?" His words were meant to be cruel, but they had lost their power to wound me. He was right. He would never understand. Then Emily came on the line, her voice thick with manufactured tears. "Daddy, please," she sobbed. "Don't do this to us. Don't you care about my happiness? Everything we have is on the line. Our home, my life with Alex, everything. Please, just this one time. If you love me, you'll do this for us." I listened to her performance, and for the first time I felt nothing but a profound, sorrowful distance. The daughter I had raised would have died before asking me to sacrifice her mother's memory. This person on the phone was a stranger, a woman who had traded her heart for a lifestyle. The emotional manipulation was the final confirmation I needed. My voice was gentle but absolute. "Emily, my love for you has nothing to do with this. My decision is final. I will not mortgage your mother's home." The crying stopped. Instantly. The sobs were replaced by a cold, sharp silence, and then her voice came back, no longer pleading, but filled with a venom that chilled me to the bone. "Fine," she hissed. "I see. I guess we know what your family is really worth to you now." And with that, she hung up. The click of the phone echoed in the quiet kitchen. I set my coffee cup down. I should have been devastated. I should have felt a crushing sense of loss. But I didn't. Instead, a strange and powerful feeling washed over me: freedom. The final invisible chain that had bound me to them, the chain of fatherly obligation, of guilt, of a love that was no longer returned, had just been broken. They had been the ones to shatter it. They had freed me from my own heart. I stood up and walked to the window, looking at the mighty oak tree, its branches reaching for the sky. The silent war was about to become active, and now I was finally free to fight it. After the phone call, the final emotional tether to my daughter was severed. I was operating now in a space of pure clarity, unburdened by guilt or hesitation. The mission was clear. My first call was to George, my second to Mr. Reed. Within hours, the three of us were gathered in a sleek, anonymous conference room in Mr. Reed's office tower, a place that was quickly becoming our war room. The target was the deal Alex and Emily had been so desperate to save. It took Mr. Reed's team of analysts less than a day to get me every detail. The property wasn't just a random office block. It was the old Merchants Bank building on Grand Avenue, a beautiful historic landmark with intricate stonework and towering columns, a relic from an era when buildings were made to last. I remembered my own father taking me past it as a boy, telling me it was a symbol of the city's strength. Alex, in his arrogance, had seen it only as a number on a spreadsheet. He had put in a lowball, highly leveraged offer, assuming his family name would intimidate any other potential buyers. He had been reckless, leaving himself completely exposed. George, using his vast network of old colleagues in the city's financial circles, confirmed the most critical piece of intelligence. "It's true, Bob," he said, sliding a folder across the polished table to me. "I spoke to a friend at Harrison Sterling's bank. Harrison has flatly refused to bail his son out. He told the loan officer he wants Alex to learn the sting of failure." A cold smile touched my lips. Harrison wanted to teach his son a lesson. It was a cruel, patriarchal power play designed to keep Alex under his thumb. But in his arrogance, Harrison had created the perfect opening for me. He thought he was the only teacher in the classroom. He had no idea a new professor had just entered the room with a much more permanent lesson plan in mind. For the next few days, we worked with a quiet, methodical intensity. We analyzed every aspect of the deal, the building's structural reports, the zoning regulations, the potential for future development. I was no longer just a retired postal worker. I was the chairman of the board, learning a new language of amortization schedules and capital expenditure. The power I felt wasn't just in the 9-figure bank account. It was in the knowledge, in the strategy. The deadline for Alex's financing was Friday at 5 p.m. If he couldn't produce the funds, the deal would collapse and the property would go back on the market. We planned our move with military precision. Mr. Reed advised a strategy of overwhelming force. "We won't just meet the asking price," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strategist's fire. "We will go in 20% over all cash. No contingencies, no inspections. We will include proof of funds and a signed offer that expires in 60 minutes. We will give the sellers no reason to hesitate, and our competition no time to react." At 4 o'clock on that Friday, the war room was silent. We sat watching the clock on the wall. I felt no anxiety, no frantic energy. I felt the same calm I used to feel before a major mail sort during the Christmas rush, a sense of process, of a plan in motion. At precisely 4:30 p.m., Mr. Reed gave a simple nod. His assistant hit send on an email that would detonate in the heart of the city's real estate world. The response was faster than any of us expected. At 4:52 p.m., Mr. Reed's private line rang. He answered, listened for a moment, and then a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "Thank you," he said simply, and hung up. He looked at me. "Congratulations, Mr. Vance. The sellers have accepted your offer. The Merchants Bank building belongs to the DV Legacy Trust." A quiet satisfaction settled over me. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It was the peaceful, solid feeling of a promise kept. We learned later about the shockwave our offer sent through the Sterling enterprise. They were stunned. Who was this DV Legacy Trust? The name was a ghost, a mystery. They had no idea that the foundation of their defeat was a $2 lottery ticket they had given as a joke. I stood at the conference room window, looking down at the city skyline. I could just make out the top of the old bank building, its proud stone facade catching the last rays of the afternoon sun. They had tried to take my house, the building that held my wife's memory, so I had taken theirs instead. The first move was complete. The board was now set for the final face-to-face confrontation, and for the first time, I was looking forward to it. The meeting was set for the following Wednesday at 10 a.m. The location was non-negotiable. It would be held on the top floor of the Merchants Bank building in the grand wood-paneled boardroom that had once belonged to the bank's founder. It was a room that smelled of old money, leather, and history. My history now. George, Mr. Reed, and I arrived an hour early. We didn't need to prepare. The plan was already in motion. This was simply the final ceremonial act. I took my place at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, the seat where the bank president would have sat a century ago. From the tall, arched window behind me, I had a commanding view of the entire city. George sat to my right, a quiet pillar of support, and Mr. Reed to my left, the embodiment of legal authority. We sat in a comfortable silence, three old soldiers waiting for the defeated enemy to arrive for the surrender. At precisely 10 o'clock, we heard them. Their footsteps were heavy and confident in the marble hallway, their voices echoing slightly. They were laughing about something, the sound arrogant and dismissive. They clearly believed they were walking into a meeting with a peer, a fellow titan of industry they could negotiate with or perhaps intimidate. The heavy oak doors swung open. Harrison Sterling strode in first, a broad, predatory smile fixed on his face, his hand already extended. Alex followed a half-step behind a carbon copy of his father's smug self-assurance. "Mr. Reed," Harrison boomed, his eyes scanning the room for the man in charge. "Harrison Sterling, a pleasure to finally meet the man behind the mystery." His eyes swept past me without a flicker of recognition, assuming I was a low-level assistant or a functionary brought in to take notes. He was looking for a reflection of himself, another man in a $1,000 suit. And then his gaze circled back. It settled on me, sitting silently at the head of the table. The smile on his face didn't vanish instantly. It froze. It was a slow, agonizing process, like a photograph developing in reverse. The confident lines around his eyes tightened. A flicker of confusion, a momentary neurological misfire crossed his face as his brain tried to reconcile the image it was seeing with the reality it was expecting. Beside him, Alex had stopped dead in his tracks. His journey was much faster, a free fall from the heights of arrogance to the depths of pure shock. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly white. His eyes, which had been filled with a casual cruelty at the brunch, were now wide with a dawning childlike horror. He was the first to break the thick, heavy silence. The sound he made was barely a word, more like a gasp, a puff of air forced from collapsing lungs. "Dad." It was a question, a plea, a denial, all wrapped in a single pathetic syllable. He looked from me to George, then to Mr. Reed, his mind scrambling to understand the impossible power dynamic in the room. He looked at the opulent boardroom, at the cityscape behind me, at the quiet authority with which I occupied the main chair. And he finally understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an execution. Harrison, the more seasoned predator, recovered more quickly, though the shock was still evident in the rigid set of his jaw. The manufactured warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard assessment. He was no longer looking at a potential business partner. He was looking at an adversary who had just dealt him a stunning, incomprehensible defeat. He slowly retracted his outstretched hand. I, in turn, had not moved a muscle. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply watched them, letting them drown in the silence, letting the full weight of their miscalculation crush them. I had waited my entire life to feel this powerful, but it wasn't a feeling of joy. It was a feeling of balance, of a great cosmic scale finally tipping back to equilibrium. After letting the silence stretch for what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it filled the cavernous room. "Harrison, Alex," I said, my tone even and professional. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." It wasn't a request. It was a command. And in that moment, they knew with absolute certainty that they were no longer in control. They both took a seat, not out of politeness, but because their legs seemed to have lost their strength. Alex slumped into his chair, a puppet with its strings cut, his eyes vacant, and staring at the polished surface of the table. Harrison, however, straightened his spine, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was a cornered animal, still dangerous, still searching for an angle. I let the silence hang for another moment. Before I began, my voice was quiet, the calm eye of the storm. "Alex," I said, looking directly at him. "At the Father's Day brunch, you told me you were teaching Emily about smart investments. Low risk, high potential. You were right to do so. An investment is only as good as its return." I paused, letting my words sink in. A $13,000 cruise is a fine gift, but I've found that a $2 investment can, under the right circumstances, yield a far greater return. I slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a certified copy of the winning lottery ticket. Harrison's eyes darted down to the paper, his mind quick as a calculator, instantly understanding the impossible truth. Alex didn't even look. He just shook his head slowly, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. "You wanted me to sacrifice my home," I continued, my voice still devoid of malice. "The last physical piece of my life with Diane. You wanted me to leverage my past to bail out your reckless future. You called me selfish for refusing to do so. That day I decided to take your advice. I decided to make a smarter investment." The doors to the boardroom opened silently. Mr. Reed gave a slight nod, and Emily stepped inside. She had clearly been waiting in the antechamber. She looked pale and lost her eyes, darting from her husband's broken form to her father-in-law's stone-faced rage and finally to me. She saw the copy of the ticket on the table, and a small, choked sound escaped her lips. I turned my attention to her, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its resolve. "This building is now the primary asset of a trust," I explained. "And that trust has a purpose. It's not about accumulating wealth. It's about creating value." I gestured to the window behind me to the sprawling city below. "The entire top floor of this building, this very boardroom, and the offices surrounding it will be leased for the next 50 years for $1 per year to a new non-profit organization." I let that hang in the air before delivering the final, crucial piece of the lesson. It will be called the Diane Vance Foundation for Women Entrepreneurs. It will provide seed capital and mentorship to women from working-class backgrounds who want to start their own businesses. Your mother always believed that the most untapped resource in this world was a woman with a good idea who just needed a chance. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. "This, Emily, is your mother's legacy. A legacy isn't a number in a bank account. It's not a portfolio or a property. It's about building something of value for other people, not just for yourself. That's the lesson your mother taught me. I'm sorry you seem to have forgotten it." There was nothing left to say. Alex was a hollowed-out shell. Harrison Sterling, for the first time in his life, was utterly defeated, outmaneuvered by a force he could not comprehend because it wasn't driven by greed. Emily just stood there, tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the true cost of her choices. I stood up, the simple act a clear signal that the meeting was over. "Mr. Reed will be in touch regarding the final transfer of ownership," I said to Harrison. "Our business here is concluded." George and I walked out of the room, leaving the three of them alone in the silent, cavernous space that they had lost. 6 months later, I stood in that same boardroom. It was transformed. The long, intimidating table was gone, replaced by smaller collaborative workspaces. The walls were adorned with architectural renderings and business plans. The air was buzzing with energy, with the excited voices of dozens of women caterers, graphic designers, software developers, artisans. It was the official launch of the foundation. I wasn't at the podium. I was standing quietly in the back by the window watching. A young woman who had just received her first round of funding to open a bakery was laughing with her partner, her face radiant with hope. In that moment, I felt a peace that no amount of money could ever buy. They had called me a low-risk, zero-potential investment. But my life's work and Diane's enduring love had paid out a dividend beyond measure. I was not just a lottery winner. I was a man who had turned a stroke of luck into a lasting legacy. And my wife's name, the name they had so easily dismissed, was now etched into the heart of the city, a quiet promise of a new beginning for generations to come. This story is a powerful reminder that true value is not measured in dollars, but in dignity, respect, and the sacrifices we make for the ones we love. It teaches us that when we are underestimated or dismissed, the greatest response isn't loud anger, but quiet, purposeful action. True strength lies in turning a moment of disrespect into an opportunity to build a lasting legacy, not for personal gain, but for the betterment of others. It proves that our self-worth is not defined by how others see us, but by the integrity of our choices and the positive impact we leave on the world. Share in the comments below what you believe makes a person truly wealthy, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.